Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lauren and today we're going to talk some books. All right, so I've got my tea here and we're going to do stuff a little bit different today. Today we are going to be talking about the books that I have read this quarter. So I am not super great about staying on top of what I've read every month for a video. I've been keeping track in a book, but if you've been following me on social media, you know that we have been sick in this house on and off since January. And here we are in April, and that is still the case. We are still passing back and forth a cold on top of what is going on globally right now with COVID. It is, we are all in the position of not having the time available to us that we may have had in the past, especially those of us with families who are now trying to balance the work at home life and the family life and the homeschooling and all that stuff. So, and even though my husband and I both work from home, we are still struggling with finding the time outside of accomplishing the absolute essentials. So, it is lovely to be able to sit down and chat with you today about all of the books that I have read over the last few months. I will keep the synopsis short, but I will give you kind of a general idea of what the book was, and maybe I'll give it like a ranking on a 5-star ranking situation. And by read, I 100% mean listen to, because as I have already mentioned, time is kind of a problem for me. And so having the time to sit down and read a book, let alone having the patience and focus to sit down and read a book, it is just not where I am at in my life right now. But audiobooks, love audiobooks. I have been an avid audiobook listener for a few years, and each year it seems that my listening continues to grow exponentially, and I am excited to share with you all of the audiobooks that I have been listening to. So let's get started. Okay, so the first book we're going to talk about today is Gathering Blue by Lois Lowry, which is the second book in the Giver series. When I was younger, I guess 4th grade was the first time that I read The Giver, and I loved that book. I have read it multiple times since then, but it had probably been at least 10 years since the last time I read this book. So it was nice to sit down back in, I guess it was maybe December, that I sat down and read The Giver again. And I actually read the book. It's the only book I actually sat down and read last year. But I tried to read Gathering Blue as a book, thinking, it's a young adult children's book. So I should be able to handle reading it, but nope. Tried it, didn't work for me. Listened to the audiobook. And I have to say that it was slow going at first for me. I did eventually enjoy listening to the story, and I will continue to finish this series because I have not read the other books in the series before. So I am looking forward to reading them. But if I was gonna, The Giver, I would give 5 stars. Gathering Blue, I would probably give 3. Okay. The next book I read was The Wicked King by Holly Black, which is the second book in the series. A very talented narrator that I know actually narrates this, her name is Caitlin Kelly. And I was so excited when I picked the first book up and realized that Caitlin was narrating it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so awesome. So I am new to the, more science fiction genre. I'm more of a murder mystery, true crime, nonfiction, autobiography, memoir stuff. That's more my genre of choice. So this was a little bit out of my realm of what I normally reach for, but I had heard really wonderful. I'm sorry, I keep looking at my baby monitor. So if I happen to glance off to the side, I am looking at the monitor because I have it turned down during my little one's nap, so that the noise machine is not just in the background. Was that too much information? Did you not need to know that? Sorry. Okay. let's get back to it. So, The Wicked King. The Wicked King is the second book in the series. The whole story takes place in Fairy and surrounds this. The main character is actually a human that has been brought to the fairy world alongside her twin sister and her older sister, who is part fairy. She has an arch nemesis in the fairy world who is actually a fairy prince. And the second book continues that story. I liked this book more than the first book. I would say I would have given the first book maybe like 3.5, 4. And this is like a solid 4, 4.5. And once I get to the third book, this could potentially like go a little bit higher. I would definitely want to re-listen to this, but the tension in this book was on point for me. The next book that I listened to was The Girl Who Lived Twice by David Lagerkrantz, which is the latest book in the Lisbeth Salander Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series, written by Stieg Larsson. For those of you that don't know, Stieg Larsson actually ended up passing away, and David Lagerkrantz has been continuing the series at the request, approval of the family and the trust holders of the estate. But unfortunately, I have found that the Lagerkrantz books are just not quite up to par with the original series. And I am a completionist, and I kind of just, I always like revisiting these characters of Lisbeth Salander and Mikael Blomkvist. And so, yes, I read it. I was excited to read it. It was fine. It was fine. But I would recommend definitely the first 3, even the 4th book in the series you should do it. I listen to those books at least once a year. So, I mean, if that tells you anything, like having the desire to reread anything, I mean, it kind of, gives you a sense of how impactful those books have been to me. The next book I read was Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. This book was great. It had me from the get-go. I loved the narrative of the story. The character of Eleanor Oliphant, her voice and her outlook on life. I so thoroughly enjoyed listening to this entire book. And I would be highly, highly interested in reading more from this author. I would give this book easily a 4.55 stars for sure. The next book was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And if you are a regular booktuber, you have probably heard all about this book over the last year. But if you have not, this book is a full cast narration with Benjamin Bratt and Flashdance. What is her name? Jennifer Beals, and it was so good. It's a combination of a Rolling Stone interview with VH1 Behind the Music. Anyone who grew up in the 90s, early 2000s, you remember those music shows. This is that, only in book/audiobook form. This is one of those books that is definitely recommended to listen to versus just reading, because the characters really come to life. I would give this book a 4.5, 5 stars as well. The next book I read was Still Life by Louise Penny. Still Life is a detective series based on a French-Canadian officer, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. And it's a whole series. So this was the first book in the series, and I do enjoy a good detective series, and I would definitely listen to more in this series. I would say this was probably like a 3.5, 4 for me. I was not familiar with Louise Penny's work previously, but she is a very well-known detective writer. So if you are looking for a new detective series, definitely, this is one of those ones you should definitely check out. And the last book I read in January was The Power of Vulnerability by Brene Brown. I've really enjoyed listening to Brene Brown's work over the last few months. This series is a series of lectures that she was recorded live, and I really enjoyed hearing her talk to an audience, which was different than some of the other stuff I've listened to, which is her just narrating her her work. She's a very enjoyable human to me. I really vibe with her attitude towards life, and how she kind of has like a self-deprecating humor and all that good stuff. So I think that if you are interested in hearing more about her work with shame and vulnerability and how to be a full-hearted person and live a happy life, like these things are all really great. I would give this one probably a 4. All right, so now we are in February. I did not listen to as much in February as I did in January. I hit the ground running in January, and then I got sick at the end of the month. So I didn't listen to as much in February because I was sick for 3 weeks. So the first book I listened to was The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell. I have listened to only one other Lisa Jewell book, and I really liked that one. Can't remember the name of it. It's about a woman whose daughter went missing. And I'll pop a picture of that up here. But this book is really interesting. It's about a family with secrets, and you kind of time jump back and forth between present and past and future. So I guess not really future, but present and past. And it's told from 3 different perspectives, which is always an interesting plot device to me. I would say this book would come with some trigger warnings for, abuse, familial abuse. So if that is not your jam, I would say definitely pass on this. But it's not overly graphic. Let me just say that. Like, it's not overly graphic or anything like that. It's just like a lot of mental and emotional abuse and some other things. But if you like suspenseful books, I feel like this is a good option. And if you've read any of Lisa Jewell's work before, I would say give this a shot. I would give this like a 3.5 stars, maybe 4. And I'm looking forward to reading more from her because I see she seems to write things that I enjoy listening to. The next book I listened to was, I don't remember the full name of it, but I wrote down Maisie Dobbs, so I will pop that in right there. But it was another new detective series that I discovered and really enjoyed. It's set post-World War I, and it's a female detective series, and I really enjoyed it. It's set in the UK, and I am on board with reading more. I would give this one like a solid 4, maybe even 4.5. The next thing I listened to was just a short kind of essay from one of those free things that Audible gives you when you have a membership, called Caffeine by Michael Pollan. And the thing about this was it's more of a observation from him on what his experience with caffeine has been, his addiction to caffeine, and all of our addiction to caffeine is, with some history and some science involved, but really just his ruminating on his experience of giving up caffeine for a while and how he felt it affected him, and how he ultimately went back to drinking caffeine. And I myself have had kind of an experience with caffeine over the last couple of years. I was pregnant, so I was completely caffeine free for 10 months. And then I was caffeine free when I was breastfeeding, but my breastfeeding journey didn't last for very long, just 3 or 4 months. And then I started drinking caffeine again. I was never a coffee drinker, and then I met my husband and I started drinking more coffee than I ever have in my entire life. I never have been a daily coffee drinker, but I do enjoy a cup of coffee every now and then. But I am a black tea drinker, and I drink tea all day long. And so I used to make giant pitchers of black iced tea, and I would just drink black iced tea all day long. So I was consuming a lot of caffeine. And then back about a year ago, my doctor had asked me to go off caffeine for a little while just to kind of eliminate whether or not it was causing pain, because apparently caffeine can cause, pain in your body. So I went off caffeine for 3 months, and I immediately felt a difference when I did. I all of a sudden didn't feel like I was dragging first thing in the morning when I woke up. I would wake up and I would kind of just be awake and ready to go. I might be tired still, but before, when I was drinking caffeine, I kind of just felt like it weighed on me until I got that next caffeine fix. I mean, it's a substance. And so, that's kind of how it gets you. You drag until you get it. And then you have all of these side effects when you go off of it, and withdrawal side effects when you go off of it. So it was just an interesting reflection on caffeine, and kind of just made me re-examine my caffeine intake and what my relationship with caffeine is. And maybe I should be just a little bit more mindful of how much caffeine I'm drinking every day, and maybe cut myself off at a certain point so that I'm not drinking caffeine at like 6 or 7 or 8 o'clock at night before I go to bed. I've never really felt like I've had an issue with caffeine, but I've also never been a very good sleeper ever since I was in high school. So it's not like I was consuming a ton of caffeine back then either, but I mean, you never know. Your bodies change, and it's just always good to try things out and be a little bit more mindful of what you're putting into your body. So anyway, that was a really long, rambling talk about something that was just like a free Audible thing that wasn't very long and not really a book. So, okay. So the next thing I listened to, and that was February. That's everything that I listened to in February. So as I said, not very much. So in March, I finally got around to listening to Red, White, and Royal Blue. This book was talked about all over the place on BookTube last year. And I mean, it's a romantic novel, and I like a good chick lit book. Like, it's all good. Like, I'm here for it. So I was really excited about trying this book out, and I've got to say, I am in the minority. I didn't really like it. I didn't like how the main character talked to other people, and I just didn't really like him very much. I liked everybody else, even though, I mean, it's chick lit. Like, it's how everything, just conveniently works itself out, and happenstance and all that stuff. So it's like, you kind of expect that going in. So it's not like that part. It's just, it's kind of like, oh, I kind of see everything coming kind of thing. But mainly my issue with the book was I just didn't particularly care for how the main character, Alex, like talked to people. Just very kind of arrogant and slightly cruel language. I just wasn't a fan of it. So I'm going to say it was a 2 for me. But this is a really beloved book. Like, people really, really loved this book. So don't be turned off by me saying that it was only a 2 for me. I think you should definitely give it a shot. And if you feel like it is something you would enjoy, definitely read it, because, everybody's just not going to enjoy the same thing. But I listened to the whole thing. I wanted it to be so much more, and I just felt like I couldn't really root for him, and that was really frustrating. I hate when that happens with characters. I want to like the main character. I have a hard time when I don't like the main character. So anyway, that was the first book I read in March. Okay, the next book I read was Turn the Key by Ruth Ware. If anybody has read this book was so creepy. This book was so creepy. Okay, so if you have read this book, then you know. This book is super, super creepy. It is super creepy from the get-go, and it does not stop being creepy the entire time. I was so creeped out the entire time that I was listening to this book. And I like thrillers and suspenseful books, right? I'm not a fan of horror films, okay? And part of the reason why I'm not a fan of horror films is like the jump scare situation. Like, I don't like that. And this very much teetered on just like waiting for the jump scare to happen. But it was a very good book. I didn't know anything about it going in. I found out later on that it's actually like a retelling of a very famous short story. So I would say give it a listen if you don't feel like you will be super creeped out. So I would give this like a 4.5. Yeah, I don't want to say anything else because I want this to be pretty much spoiler free, but yeah. Super creepy. Okay, so the next book I finished, was The Actor's Life by Jenna Fischer. I actually started this back in 2019 and put it down for a while and finally got around to finishing it. It is kind of like a how to pursue your acting career after you graduate from college, kind of like a how-to of like what you should do, what you should not do. I read a lot of books like this after I graduated from college, and had this book been available, I would definitely would have read it and would definitely recommend it to anybody who is just starting their acting career. It was enjoyable, kind of just getting to hear a little bit more about Jenna's experience. I am a fan of The Office, and if you are also a fan of The Office, then we like to consume basically anything that the people from that show put out. So there you go. I would give this book, I guess, like a 3.5. It was fine. The next book I listened to was Keep Moving by Dick Van Dyke. Now, this is the first book that I have listened to from Dick Van Dyke. I was never the biggest Dick Van Dyke fan. Like, I never watched the Dick Van Dyke Show. I've seen a few of his movies, like Mary Poppins, and I love him in those. He's just his personality is so infectious. You just like love him, right? Like, I love Dick Van Dyke. I don't really know anything about him, but I love him, right? So I was excited to listen to this book, narrated by him. I would be interested in listening to some of his other books. This focuses a lot on what his experience of life has been, especially now that he is reached his 80s, and his kind of theory of how to stay healthy, both mentally, physically, and all that stuff as you age. That the main thing is to continue to find the joys in your life. And one of the joys in his life is dancing. And so, he's always telling people, keep moving, keep pursuing the things that bring you joy. But in some ways, this book was kind of like an older relative telling you all about, they know so much more because they're so much older than you. They've experienced so much life and they know best and all that kind of thing. So it kind of had a little bit of that tone to it. And I'm just a moody millennial and I don't like being talked to like that. So that part of it kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but I would definitely be interested in like hearing some of his books from earlier on in his career, because I know he didn't mean for it to come off that way. It's just, sometimes when people talk to each other, that's sometimes how it comes off. So I would give this one like a 3.5, but I am sure your grandparents, if they're looking for a book, would love this book. So they would probably give it a 5. All right, so the next book I finished was My Sister Lives on the Mantlepiece by Annabel Pitcher. And this is a book I started actually a couple of years ago and never finished. I started it and bought it in the first place was because David Tennant narrates it. And I love David Tennant. Yeah. Any Doctor Who fans out there? So I found the book to be kind of like a slow starter for me, but upon picking it up and listening to it now, I actually really enjoyed listening to this book. I found the characters really interesting. It's all from the perspective of a young boy. I think he's like 10 or 11 years old, and I don't think it's too big of a spoiler to say that he has an older sister and a younger sister, or maybe... No, they were twins. Okay, so 2 older sisters and they were twins. One of his sisters dies, and they died from one of the bombings in London after 9/11. So it shapes what his family's viewpoint and how his family functions moving forward. And it was just an interesting exploration of a younger male child. It was just interesting to hear a story told from a young boy's perspective. It's been a while since I've read. I mean, I guess I did read The Giver, which is told from Jonas's point of view, but I mean, like a new book that's told from a young boy's perspective. It's been a really long time since I've done that. So I would give this book a 4. The next thing I listened to was Have a Nice Day by Billy Crystal, which was actually a staged reading of a play that he wrote that stars Kevin Kline. It takes place, So, quick synopsis. I don't want to give away too much of what it's about, but Billy Crystal plays an angel, and he has come to take Kevin Kline to the pearly gates, and Kevin Kline manages to negotiate a full 24 hours before that happens. And so you get to see how his 24 hours left on Earth plays out. So that's that. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was funny. It's right up my alley. You're mixing humor and theater and all the things. Some of my favorite people, Billy Crystal, Kevin Kline, all that good stuff. I really enjoyed it. I would give this like a 3.5 of 4. And then the last book I read in March was was Easy Kisses by Kristen Proby. It's another romance book. I have never read anything from Kristen Proby, and this book is in the middle of a series all about siblings who live in New Orleans. And the reason I picked up this book, it was during a sale a couple of years ago. And it's one of the it's a dual narration, and one of the narrators is Sebastian York, who I have really enjoyed narrating Lauren Christine books that I've read. I don't read a ton of romance, but the ones that I've enjoyed were written by the Lauren Christine team, and he is a fantastic romance narrator. His voice reminds me of Dermot Mulroney. If I didn't know any better, I would say that it's him. So Dermot, if this is you, just own it, man. Just come out and say that it's you. So I didn't really like this book, like, at all. I would give it a 2 stars. I found his character so annoying. His character is supposed to be British, and there's no British accent. And no, it just didn't work. I really enjoy listening to him as a narrator. It did not work for me in this book. And I just didn't like the overall tone and story of the book in general. So it was a 2 for me, and I don't think I would listen to any more of this series in particular. But yeah, if you are a romance fan and are looking for a series of books, this might be right up your alley. It's your standard romance novel. I could not get past the British man who didn't have a British accent. It didn't work for me. So anyway, that is all I read for January, February, and March of 2020, you guys. And I may get around to doing one specifically just for April, or I might wait until the summer to give a recap on all the books that I read for the second quarter of the year. But thank you so much for sitting through this with me. If you are still here, drop me a comment down below and let me know what some of your favorite reads from the last few months have been. I am always looking for new things to pick up. I love utilizing both my library and Audible to get books. And so if there is any book, it doesn't have to be an audiobook, but if you also had an audiobook or you have a favorite audiobook narrator, I would love to hear who some of your favorite narrators are. Maybe that would be another good video to do, as some of my favorite audiobook narrators. All right, you guys. So thanks again for joining me. I hope you are all well. And yeah, talk to you soon. Bye.